Wow. Thank you. I would like to invite Jen and Steve to come and join us up here. And in case we said it too quickly earlier, for those of you joining us by live stream, you're welcome to submit questions to my email. And I'll give you a few moments to grab a pen, and then I'll reiterate my email. My email is tmehrmuska@ahcc.org. So feel free to submit questions. I'm monitoring my phone, while we also have people here who might have some questions as well. Do we have any questions from the audience? And it may take a few moments for them to brew. So maybe I'll start here.
Before you ask any questions, I just want to say that there is no question that is too personal. Not a single question that is too personal.
So I might start with a question for Jen, if I could. So I'm curious how you and Steve met and how it was that you became inspired to produce this beautiful film.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me? First of all, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to Kathleen and Tracy and Erica and Jack who's done all the technical stuff, and Jordan for the introduction. It's nice to be back here. So interestingly enough, I was in Israel and had just come back, and I got a call from the rabbi who's featured in the film, and he said, he knew I was a filmmaker. I had filmed him for another project I had done, and he said, you've got to go down and film Steve's exhibition. I didn't know anything about it. And I called Steve. The exhibition was shutting down in 3 days. So I had to get a film crew and just get it together very quickly. So we filmed Thursday before the Friday shutdown, and I interviewed Steve. And this was, he and I had talked, and we just thought, well, this will be a one-off. I'll film the exhibition, I'll just do a little interview, and that was it. So I spent, as you can imagine, pretty much the entire interview crying. And when we left, I said, this has got to be a film. And that was the genesis of it.
Thank you. And so, Steve, what made you willing to tell this story in this format?
It was just a natural, just intuitive decision. You know, I had the exhibition, everything that led up to my wife and I deciding to have the exhibition and mounting the exhibition and having the exhibition. And one of the common themes among our Fathers Forever group is, as I stated in the film, is the fear that the memory of our children will fade. And I saw this as another way of extending Jared's memory and sharing his legacy. So there was really no decision to be made.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions from anyone here in person?
Don't be shy.
Keep going, Drew.
We are inviting you to use the microphone, not just for the people in the room, but also for the people on live stream.
How long did it take you to make each bowl, and what were you doing while you were making them? Were you saying a prayer? Were you singing? Were you just thinking? What was the actual process as you were doing
The making of the chawans took 2 minutes, sometimes 3, if I was really thinking about it, not just doing it naturally. So it's a very fast forming process. And it was just quiet, meditative, solitary. When I do my regular work in my studio, I've got music playing in the background. I hear it, but I don't listen to it. When I made the Kaddish chawans, they were single, individual solitary acts of making with no distractions. One of the reasons that I did them early in the morning is because I have a group studio and I didn't want any interruptions. The main studio is separate from my own space, but people would often come in and say hello, and I allow people to watch me work, but I did them early, so I was sure that there would be no distractions, and I wasn't listening to music. The only sounds I heard were the natural sounds coming in from the window or the building or whatever, and that was the making of the chawans, and they were the only pots that I made for an entire year. One Kaddish chawan a day, no matter where I was. And there were a few times during the course of the year where I had to travel for my work. And I would arrange with a potter in the area to go into their studio and make a chawan. Or if I was doing a workshop and a demonstration, that was obvious that I could do that. But there were times when I was in a hotel just giving a lecture or giving a talk, and there was no clay involved. And I brought clay with me and made a chawan by hand in my hotel room. So I never missed a day, I never doubled up. It was one a day for 365 days.
It was a wonderful documentary. I'm just curious, I think it's rather unusual to have an art show with a theme of remembrance, or that kind of a theme. What was the audience like? Were they people who were suffering, or were they art people?
It's hard to hear with the echo. You mean the people that were there in
the people that were there?
That came
I
to
mean,
the reception?
who were the people at the reception?
Right.
Were they artists, or were they people who understood what you were trying to do?
It's a great question, and it speaks to a number of things when an artist has the reception for an exhibition. So one of the universal fears among artists is that what if you give a reception and nobody comes? No matter how well-known you are, experienced you are, renowned you are, recognized you are, it doesn't matter. What if I give an opening reception and nobody comes except me, my wife, my closest friends? You know, that's a scary notion. Well, as you saw in the film, that wasn't the problem. It was wall-to-wall people. It was like Woodstock. And I was at Woodstock. So the people there, some were artists, many were close friends and family, Thayer community. It was a mixture of people, but it was not the connection or the commonality between the people that were there at the exhibition was not about loss or mourning. Yes, there were people there from my Father's Forever group, obvious grief, and there were other people who had suffered loss over the course of their lives, but that wasn't what necessarily brought the group of people together. There were probably 200 people or more that were there in that exhibition, covering all walks of life, ages, genders, and connections to me. And there were people there that I had never met before, brought by other people, friends. So it was a real mixture of people.
And if I may ask a related question to Jen, who was the audience you were imagining for the film?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that, people always say, it could be anyone, but I really think that you don't get out of this world without being touched by loss in some way. And it's not necessarily a son, it could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be a friend. And I think it's how we come to figure out, as Steve said, and he taught me a lot by my work in the film, is that, you incorporate it, you learn how to incorporate it into your life, but you don't sort of move through it. It doesn't become, I spoke to somebody earlier today who lost her partner, and she said, it feels fresh, and it was years ago. And so I think that that's sort of a piece of it. And I also think, this film was finished at the end of April 2020. For those of us that remember what was happening, it was about a month after the lockdown. So, COVID was very present for me in terms of trying to get the film out to the world and trying to get festivals. There were a lot of festivals that then went remote or virtual because they had no choice. And, I think that there was a big link for the loss of what COVID had done to people and community. And so I think that resonated for a lot of people, in the film festival circuit. And so I really feel like you don't have to have had that loss to be able to identify with Steve's story. And also, you may get to this, but I just want to also interject about, how one grieves. There's so many ways to do it. It's not just about, saying a prayer every day. You can write in a journal. Someone said that, she makes her mom's favorite breakfast every year on her mom's birthday. And she didn't really love the breakfast so much, actually, but it was her mom's favorite. So that was a way to remember her mom. So some people say, I'm going to, hike a mountain every month. There's something. So there's just so many ways to do it. And I feel like I also wanted this film to be able to give people the opportunity to think outside the box. How does it work for you? It's not just what's, in a religious doctrine, but how does it make you feel or make you connected to the person who's gone? So that's sort of my hope.
Thank you. That was a very interesting answer, too. I do appreciate the fact that this did bring forth the different ways people can grieve. My question, though, is for you, Steve, and that is, it's my understanding from the film that these bowls are for sale. Is that right? So it would be hard for me to have made something in memory of a loved one and then offer it to the community. So I'm just curious what your thought process was and how you made that decision.
To sell them, the decision to sell them.
Yes.
Yeah, that's another great question. So the concept of the exhibition was something that just developed. It's not something that I sat down and decided, now I'm going to glaze and fire them, then I'm going to exhibit them, and I'm going to sell them. And it didn't happen like that. It wasn't a planned out path. When I realized that it was time and I was ready to glaze them and fire them and complete them, that's what I started to do. And then as I started to do that, I was thinking to myself and talking to Ellen, expressing what I'm going to glaze and fire these, then what? Well, let's share them in an exhibition. Let's share my reason for doing this and my inspiration for doing this and my motivation for doing this. So we decided to have the exhibition. And then as we were planning the exhibition, the next question came up was, now I'm going to have this exhibition. I'm going to share 365 Kaddish chawans and all of the inspiration and motivation for me having done this. Then what? Am I going to pack these away and put them away? And so we decided together that we would sell them, not only as a way to share Jared's memory and legacy and my way of incorporating what had happened to me, but we would take all the proceeds and donate them to the cancer-fighting organizations that we support. And the selling of them, having them in other people's possessions, was an incredibly moving and motivating experience and thought for me, and then experience for me. And when I do workshops and give talks and give lectures and write, one of the questions that invariably comes up by somebody is, while I'm demonstrating, somebody will ask me, Steve, when do you know your pot is finished? And what they mean, and I know what they mean, is, when do you know when to stop? You know, you got this clay on the wheel, you're making a vessel, you're making a pot, how do you know when to stop? So I turn the question back over to the participants and I ask them. So somebody will say, well, when the wall is thin enough, or they'll say when the neck is tall enough, or they'll say when the body is wide enough, or they'll say when it just looks finished to me. And then eventually the question comes back to me and somebody says, okay, Steve, now you know when we know our pots are finished, when do you know when your pot is finished? My pot is completed when it's in the possession of somebody else. And these Kaddish chawans in the possession of other people is such a vast, emotionally, in some ways devastating, in other ways rewarding notion that these are in other people's possessions. And not just in Connecticut or Massachusetts or Rhode Island or in 30 or more states, but in Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria, in France, in the UK, in Australia.
Beautiful, thank you. So we do have a question from one of our live streamers, our dear friend Karin. She writes, we are close to 20 years since our daughter's death. The legacy activities of the first 10 years related to her writing and mine were sacred and grace-filled, just like your wonderful work, Stephen. What now for you and your wife and family are you doing as you continue to hold Jared's memory in your hearts?
No question is too personal. Did I really say that? Well, I mean, I can answer this in many ways. So Jared's spirit and presence is with me every day. Do I wake up in the morning and have the first thought of Jared? No. Do I go to bed thinking about Jared? Necessarily no. But his presence is with me every day. When I go into my studio, he's there. He's all around. I have his work there. We have his work on display and photographs in the house. So he's with us every day. He's with me every day. My grandchildren, Jared's younger brother, Adam, has 2 children. Serena is 7.5 and Maya is 5.5. And from the time that they were old enough to understand, they met Jared. They learned about Jared. And they have pictures of him by their bedside. And they call and FaceTime us and sing happy birthday on Jared's birthday. And last year, for Jared's birthday, they called and Serena, who was 6.5 at the time, said, Grandma, Grandpa, if I was there. If I was there with you, I would bring flowers for Jared. And just this past March, they came and visited for the first time we were together, before COVID hit. And they asked their father, Adam, if they could visit Jared at the cemetery. And Adam took them to the cemetery. So I have no fear that people will remember him and his legacy will live on, and that Ellen and I need to consciously plan ways to remember him. The days just go by. What has happened has been incorporated into our lives, and he is there with us.
Thank you. This is just absolutely beautiful.
both of you. Thank you. And now he lives with us too, so thank you for sharing him. A colleague of mine has coined a term, holy envy. And I think Kaddish is so amazing. And I know so little about it, but thanks to you a lot more. And I just think there's such wonderful faith practices that we can share with each other. I have experienced a little holy envy about Ramadan too, and that beautiful practice. You know, we have so much to support each other, and I'm so grateful to know more about Kaddish.
Well, Kaddish is a unique prayer, mourner's Kaddish. Well, Kaddish in general, there are different forms of Kaddish that are said at different times of a service. And I'll let Jen explain the uniqueness of mourner's Kaddish.
So, I mean, I think the importance is that the prayer is really all about love of God. It has nothing, it doesn't say anything about death at all. So that's sort of an interesting thing, and I'm not sure if people are feeling so much love for God at the moment of death and hurt and pain, but it's an Aramaic prayer, it's not even Hebrew, and it's been said for centuries. But I think my sense of the most important part of it is that it's said in community. You don't say it by yourself, you say it in community. And so Steve went to a minyan, which means 10 people or 10 men, and every night or every morning, depends on the synagogue, you would go into services and say it. And it's a daily service, so it's shorter than the longer services on the Sabbath. But, mostly it depends. People would, stand up who's ever mourning, and you're in community, so they can support you through that process. And I think that's the beauty of it, that whether you agree with the words or not, you're acknowledging another day in the life of your mourning. And so to me, that piece of community is really important. Thank you for the question.
And in addition to being an expression of your love of God, it is an affirmation of your faith, which is connected to your love of God, but you don't have to love God to affirm your faith. When somebody passes away, as everybody here has experienced some loved one passing away, you question God. Why did this happen? And for us, why did this happen to us? It's not just why did it happen to Jared, but why did it happen to us? So there was no love lost between me and God. But Kaddish reaffirmed what was a way to reaffirm my faith in God.
I think the thing to keep in mind is that every parent, every father might endure some kind of loss like this. In this particular case, it's Jared, but in other cases, right out here on Asylum Street, a father might send his kid out to play, and 5 minutes later he's shot dead. That speaks to incredible loss, because there is no goodbye. There is no chance to say goodbye. It's instantaneous, and we have too much of that here in Hartford and in other areas of the country. This is a beautiful example of one parent finding an outlet for the grief. But think of the other parents on the street. To me, it's unthinkable how devastating it's got to be. I guess it's not a question, that's a statement. But
Thanks.
That's a statement. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for your
Another thing that comes up often in our Fathers Forever group is the understanding. Well, first of all, when we get together, we could sit together for an hour and not utter a sound because we're communicating telepathically. There's a bond there that is unique and strong and comforting and comfortable. And as close as we are, sharing the common bond of having had children that have passed away, we also understand and recognize and in some ways celebrate the fact that as close as we are in experience, I can't walk in Howard's shoes because the circumstances of his son's death is different than mine. And I can't walk in John's shoes, and he can't walk in mine. So as close as we are to each other, we recognize this, and we have men in the group whose children, a lot of medical things, cancer, heart defects, you name it, but murder, child abuse, car accident, motorcycle accident, you name it. We have men in the group who've lost, and actually I don't like to use the expression lost. We have men in the group who have had 2 children that have passed away. And one of the things that we say to recognize this is that we're all tied for first in the category of tragedy. We're all tied for first.
Yes. Watching this film bring back so much memories of me. I've lost my daughter when she was 33 years old, and she has 4 kids. And now our grandmother has been taking care of them. And it touched my heart so much. It brings back tears to my eyes. And I'm glad I came and watched them. And thank you very much for that film. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much. Well, you bring up an interesting point about aspects of grief being universal and also grief being very individual. I'm wondering, in terms of making the film, was that a challenge that presented itself, or what were some of the other challenges related to kind of capture such a big and rich topic in one film?
So I felt that my first priority was really to honor Steve's story, and it wasn't necessarily, so there was twofold. One, it was to honor Steve's story, and then I think the other piece was to also show, as I mentioned before, alternate ways of grieving. It's not just clear cut, but there are many different ways that people can grieve, and that they ought to know that, you know, it's individualistic, that they can come up with their own things, as I mentioned earlier. So, you know, the hardest thing to do was to cut it down to 30 minutes. We had more footage in there, and I brought a group of filmmakers to my house, and pre-COVID, and they said, oh, you only need like 30 seconds of this. And I was like, what? That's horrible. Like, we need at least 5 minutes. And like the Fathers Forever group, you know, we had at least an hour of footage, an hour and a half of footage. And, you know, they said, oh, you don't need to go on so long. And I said, of course we do, you know. So I had to go back to my editor. And I think at that point it was maybe 42, 43 minutes. But that's a big chunk to get rid of. So we had to cut 12 minutes out, and so things got tighter. I mean, I think it got better, but, you know, it is kind of like a baby, and you nurture it, and you love it, and then all of a sudden things become, you know, fewer minutes, less. And that was hard. I wanted to make sure the story was as complete as possible. And so once I felt assured that even if we didn't have as much time in certain areas, that it would still do justice to the film. So, you know, at some point, like Steve said, you know, when the bowl is finished, I mean, you could edit a film forever, your whole life, because it's never going to be good enough. But at some point, I felt like I had to let it go and get out into the world. So that's the choice that you make.
Thank you. And we have another question from a live streamer, Gary. For as much as you're maybe willing or able to share about the process that your wife and your son might have gone through in terms of their process and how that may have aligned with yours or not.
We, the 3 of us, experienced and continue to experience Jared having passed away very differently. And Adam and Jared were as close to each other as 2 people could be and not be physically connected. From childhood, when Adam was born, Jared dressed up in a doctor's gown and every day would walk into Adam's room with his doctor kit and check him out, to make sure he was okay. And we have pictures of that. And then growing up, they were the first to cheer each other on and encourage each other academically, athletically, socially. They were just as close as brothers could possibly be. And his incorporation of his brother having passed away has been and will always be different than mine. And he surrounds himself, his incorporation and his expression is much more quiet and personal and not as public as mine. He surrounds himself with pictures of his brother, work that his brother made, and all kinds of stuff like that. And those are the things that he shares with Serena and Meyer and Anne. And it's robust, but it's different. Ellen, when we were at Children's Hospital and Jared had his final surgery, and then the doctors came out and told us that the tumor in his brain could not be removed. There was nothing else that we could do, and Jared was not going to survive. Well, we were uncontrollably sobbing in the corridor. And in the face of that, Ellen turned to me and said, "This is not going to break up our marriage." And we've been on what I thought was parallel paths of grief and mourning. Sharing some things, not being able to share some things, experiencing some things the same, experiencing some things differently. Things like food, music, restaurants, places, seasons, all kinds of things that we all experience together as a family. But I came to realize about a year or so ago that we're not and have not been on parallel paths. We've been on converging paths, where a restaurant that I was able to go to and Ellen wasn't, now we can. Or music that we could listen, that I was able to listen to that she couldn't, now we can. TV shows. There was a period where neither of us could even fathom watching a medical show on TV. And now we can in some ways. Whether we will ever completely converge, I don't think so. But it's getting closer and closer and closer.
If I could I just want to say one other thing about that, and not to talk about Steve's life, because he does a good job himself, but that I think one of the beautiful things about their relationship is they let each other grieve the way they need to. And so Steve is a much more public persona, Ellen is much more quiet and private, and they don't judge each other, they let each other do what they need to do. And as Ellen said in that hospital corridor, like that really held true, and that they don't judge each other, they let them do what they need to do. And I think that's important, and it's obviously been a blessing for their marriage. So.
And in the respect for each other, it's not that we've never and don't continue to make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are devastating, and sometimes I will hide how I feel, and sometimes Ellen will hide how she feels. But we try not to make mistakes. But it happens. It happens.
Thank you. I have a question from another live streamer, from Kathy. It's for Steve. What was it that first drew Jared to the chawans? And what are the rituals connected to the chawan making? And she thanks you for sharing your family story.
What was the second part of the question?
The first part was, what was it that drew Jared specifically to the making of chawans?
Yep.
And what are the rituals connected with chawans?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So when Jared Jared and Adam both did pottery from almost infancy in my studio, coming to watch me, sit next to me, pinch the clay, play around. They had birthday parties in the studio. And they both did pottery at Thayer, and I'm the pottery teacher at Thayer, so they're in my class. They were both very, very skilled and very talented. But Jared, from the time that he started taking formal classes with me, was very, very connected to the clay and to making things. And I'm now in my 47th year of teaching high school ceramics. Now, how could somebody who looks like me be having taught for 47 years? And I have had a lot of students that were outstanding, have gone on to art school careers, either in clay or in other forms of art. And I can list off the top of my head my top or my most memorable and most accomplished 10 or 15 students. So of that group, I could go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that's Jared. And what separates the outstanding art students from the really, really good ones and the really accomplished ones is an academic connection to what they're doing, to the history, to the culture of their art, of their medium. And Jared was interested in the history and culture from the first time he took my class as a high school student. And we're all drawn to different kinds of forms and different vessels and different aspects of the history and culture of clay. And Jared was just drawn to the bowl. And one of the reasons he was drawn to the bowl is because as simple as a bowl shape looks to us, and we all use bowls for all kinds of different things, the bowl is one of, if not the most difficult shape to make expertly. It's hard to believe. It's a bowl. You put ice cream in it, you put chicken soup in it, you put lentil soup in it, you put whatever, fruit. And each of these kinds of bowls requires a slightly or an obviously different shape. A bowl for French onion soup is different than a bowl for Chinese tea. For example, a Chinese tea bowl is this kind of shape. A bowl for onion soup is more like a crock. And Jared recognized that. And then he was drawn to the history and culture of Japanese pottery and was drawn to the chawan. And the ritual behind the chawan goes back to the codification and the formulation of the Japanese tea ceremony in the late 1500s. And I won't go into the history right now. If anybody's interested, you could talk to me afterwards. But there is a certain shape and a certain form and certain requirements that a Japanese chawan must have in order to be legitimate and authentic. And Jared knew what that was. He learned about it, and he was drawn to them and made them. And he also made them very personally and very individually. So he incorporated the necessary characteristics of a Japanese chawan with his own inspirations for making chawan. And people will say to me, boy, your Japanese chawans are amazing. Well, I don't make Japanese chawans. I'm not Japanese. I make Japanese style chawans. And that's an important distinction.
Thank you. So I have one final question that I would love for both of you to answer, if you don't mind. What is it that you hope we take home from this? What did you hope to convey with the film and with the telling of your story?
You want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay. I think I sort of stated
Depending
it.
on how she answers, that's how I answer. She always answers this first.
I think at the end of the day, I want there to be a feeling of hope. That, even though it's a story about one man's grief and his way sort of incorporating that grief into his life, that at the end of the day, I want people to feel hopeful that they can provide different ways of working through that grief in their own lives. So it may seem simplistic, but I sort of feel like, it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, maybe not a pot of gold, but that there's something to look forward to have the memories be supportive and find ways to incorporate those, whether it's a hike, whether it's communing with nature, whether it's writing in a journal, whether it's writing a short story about someone who died, whether it's about thinking about them in whatever way. And so I sort of feel like that's my goal for this film.
Thank you.
So my hope is that people will see the film and learn about another way to incorporate what has happened into their lives and be able to express it and to formulate words and phrases and ways to share what's happened with other people. And the notion of when people first learn about what has happened in my family, and that I have a child who's passed away, out of empathy and wanting to be kind, they will invariably say, I can't imagine I stop them right there. I say, you're right. You can't imagine. I don't want you to imagine. It doesn't bring me comfort with you trying to imagine. What brings me comfort is always remembering Jared. And to come kind of full circle here, I brought a random selection of the Kaddish chawans for you could certainly purchase them, but I'm not twisting anybody's arms. But you can handle them, you could look at them, you can make a physical connection now to what I experienced making Kaddish chawans for a year as a way of understanding and processing and incorporating my grief and mourning with me and with the memory and legacy of Jared by just handling one of or all of them. So that's my hope for the film.
Thank you. I'd like to give you a round of applause for your honesty. I thank you both so much on behalf of the Congregation Beth Israel and Asylum Hill Congregational Church for sharing your story and sharing with us your beautiful art, both the chawans and in the filmmaking. I also want to let people know that we will be starting a grief support group that we've been meaning to start for a while, and this really helped inspire us to make that happen. So starting in June, there will be a monthly drop-in grief support group during lunch, and we'll get information out about that, and all are welcome to join us for one time, for every month, as much as you might want or need. So I'd like to just turn it over to Erica, give her a moment, opportunity to say thank you as well.
Yes, I don't have a lot more to say other than this has been inspirational. Jen, Asylum Hill Congregational Church has known you for many years, and so we are thrilled to be able to have this here, and thank you for coming and being a part of this. And Steve, just thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and sharing Jared with us. I look forward to going and feeling, and my people know that I sort of always describe myself as a fleshy kind of pastor, and so I want to get up there and look at these and feel them. But thank you so much for being a part of this, and we're just we're honored to be a part of this story. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
And it was said before, but thanks again to Kathleen and to Jane and to the others who helped make this happen. So thank you again. And our guests are willing to stay a bit if you would like to ask questions further or have more conversation. Thank you to those of us who joined us on live stream or who might be watching this Q&A later on in the week. Blessings to everyone. Thanks again.